All right, folks, this is Mr. O'Brien, and in this video we will be going through one of Malcolm X's most famous speeches called Message to the Grassroots that he delivered in November of 1963. Again, we're still talking about the younger Malcolm X, and still at this point in the respective careers of Malcolm X versus Dr. King, their ideologies, their words, their rhetoric, their tone, their proposed actions were still more or less poles apart. All right. In actuality, when we talked about our memory of them being kind of different than they actually were, our memory tends to think of them as being polar opposites and so on and so forth. Right now, the way they are in the early 60s is kind of how we still remember them. All right. We tend to forget that as they got older, they became more like each other. All right. So it's as if they both died in 1963. All right, we forget everything they did after that and everything they said and wrote and believed and proposed after that. All right, so what we're going to do here is I have a YouTube video. There's a video, but it's just the audio of Malcolm delivering this speech. And it's broken up into 5 excerpts. All right, you can tell the excerpts based upon the timestamps. Like 0 to 255 is excerpt 1. And then excerpt 2, and so on and so forth. And following the speech are the questions. All right, and they're broken up into the excerpts, although it appears as one long excerpt on YouTube. I did this before I figured out how to put them together on YouTube like that. Years and years ago, I broke them into excerpts, and I used to have the video file in class, and I would fast forward in between excerpts. So now I can just play continuously. So basically, I will play the YouTube video. You don't need to, but there's no need to actually have the YouTube video up on the screen because it's just the audio. I'm just going to have the text up on the screen, and you're going to read along, hopefully, as the video plays. All right, and then every now and again, maybe after every excerpt, I'll stop and I'll help answer the questions. All right, so let's get to the speech.
And during the few moments that we have left, we want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me, us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand. We all agree tonight, all of the speakers have agreed that America has a very serious problem. Not only does America have a very serious problem, but our people have a very serious problem. America's problem is us. We're her problem. The only reason she has a problem is she doesn't want us here. And every time you look at yourself, be you black, brown, red, or yellow, a so-called Negro, you represent a person who poses such a serious problem for America because you're not one. Once you face this as a fact, then you can start plotting a course that will make you appear intelligent instead of unintelligent. What you and I need to do is learn to forget our differences. When we come together, we don't come together as Baptists or Methodists. You don't catch hell because you're a Baptist, and you don't catch hell because you're a Methodist. You don't catch hell because you're a Methodist or a Baptist. You don't catch hell because you're a Democrat or a Republican. You don't catch hell because you're a Mason or an Elk. And you sure don't catch hell because you're an American, because if you was an American, you wouldn't catch no hell. You catch hell because you're a black man. You catch hell, all of us catch hell for the same reason. So we are all black people, so-called Negroes, second-class citizens, ex-slaves. You are nothing but an ex-slave. You don't like to be told that. But what else are you? You are ex-slave. You didn't come here on the Mayflower. You came here in a slave ship, in chains, like a horse or a cow or a chicken. And you were brought here by the people who came here on the Mayflower. You were brought here by the so-called pilgrims or founding fathers. They were the ones who brought you here. We have a common enemy. We have this in common. We have a common common oppressor, a common exploiter, and a common discriminator. So once we all realize that we have this common enemy, then we unite on the basis of what we have in common. And what we have foremost in common is that enemy, the white man. He's an enemy to all of us. I know some of you all think that some of them aren't enemies. Time will tell. Serious problem, but our people.
Whoops. All right, let's fast forward to where we were. I can't stand having a mouse right now.
Think that some of them aren't enemies. Time will tell.
All right, so let's get to the questions. So far, they're pretty straightforward, I think. Describe America's problem as outlined by Malcolm X. It's right in that first paragraph. All right, America's problem is us. It's about the fourth line down, first paragraph. America's problem is us. We're her problem. The only reason she has a problem is she doesn't want us here. All right. And every time you look at yourself, be you black, brown, red, or yellow, a so-called Negro, you represent a person who poses such a serious problem for America because you're not wanted. All right. So that, according to Malcolm X, is America's problem. There are so many African Americans, and most white folks do not want them there. All right. That's question one. All right. So question two. In what ways does Malcolm X attempt to unify the black population? All right. In other words, what does he remind his audience? And basically, he's saying no matter what your differences are, whether what religion you are, what class you are, all right, you all have one thing in common. You're an African American, and you catch hell. In Malcolm's words, you catch hell because of that. All right, and that would be in the second paragraph. All right, and he even goes on to talk about. And again, what you're seeing here is Malcolm and his rhetorical skills, right? He's able to explain things in a very plain, folksy type of way. All right, very, very easy to understand. But also remember, he's this articulate, educated African American standing up to the big bad bully in the minds of most of the people in his audience. Okay. So he's able to explain things to them very clearly and articulately, but also defend them. So what he's also saying, there's one other sentence I want to point out here, and you should put as part of your answer. All right. Where he says, if you were an American, you wouldn't catch hell. All right. Where is it? Right here. And you sure don't catch hell because you're an American, because if you was an American, you wouldn't catch no hell. You catch hell because you're a black man. All right, and that is the second paragraph down, second to last and last line. All right. So again, you're getting some insight into Malcolm's worldview at this point. All right. He didn't think that the white community and the black community could coexist. All right. And his belief that he was only reacting to the white community otherizing the black community, calling that they're not Americans, that kind of thing. All right, so let's get to the next excerpt. This is 4 minutes. All right.
Look at the American Revolution in 1776. That revolution was for what? For land. How was it? Why did they want land? Independence. How was it carried out? Bloodshed. Number one, it was based on land. The basis of independence. And the only way they could get it was bloodshed. The French Revolution. What was it based on? The landless against the landlord. What was it for? Land. How did they get it? Bloodshed. Was no love lost. Was no compromise. Was no negotiation. I'm telling you, you don't know what our revolution is. Because when you find out what it is, you'll get back in the alley. You'll get out of the way. The moment, the Russian Revolution, what was it based on? Land. The landless against the landlord. How did they bring it about? Bloodshed. You haven't got a revolution that doesn't involve bloodshed. And you're afraid to bleed. I said you're afraid to bleed. Long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled.
It's a good argument
He
here.
sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. You bleed for white people. But when it comes time to seeing your own churches being bombed and little black girls murdered, you haven't got no blood. You bleed when the white man says bleed. You bite when the white man says bite. And you bark when the white man says bark. I hate to say this about us, but it's true. How you going to be nonviolent in Mississippi as violent as you were in Korea? How can you justify being nonviolent in Mississippi and Alabama when your churches are being bombed and your little girls are being murdered, and at the same time you're going to get violent with Hitler and Tojo and somebody else that you don't even know?
And here it is.
If violence is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong to be violent, defending black women and black children and black babies and black men, then it's wrong for America to draft us and make us violent abroad in defense of her. And if it is right for America to draft us and teach us how to be violent in defense of her, then it is right for you and me to do whatever is necessary to defend our own people right here in this country.
All right. So the first question, I believe, is how does he use history to support his call for violent revolution? All right. So if you go back to the text, the second excerpt, basically he's referring back to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, all right, and it's subsequent later in this the Russian Revolution down here, all right, bottom of page 22. So he's referring to all these past revolutions because he argues that they were all based upon land, the landless against the landlord. All right, that land is the basis of independence. Think back to the Reconstruction era, right? Andrew Johnson, early on in his presidency, reverses the Field Order Number 10, 40 acres and a mule. All right, giving the land back to the former slave owners. All right, and that I'm sure that's what was in Malcolm's mind when he was talking about this. All right, and remember, when he talks about a violent revolution, again, he's not advocating to become violent. He's advocating violent self-defense. All right, he's advocating that you separate from the white community, worry about your own community. All right, pay no mind to the white community, but fight back. If you're hit back. Okay, but that's the answer to that question. Already, all these past revolutions were based upon land, the landless against the landlord, and they all involved bloodshed. If that's what has to happen, that's what has to happen in Malcolm's mind. Let's get to the next question. All right, what are Malcolm's thoughts on on African Americans and the military? And this is a very strong argument on Malcolm's part. All right, basically he's pointing out the hypocrisy of the United States. In other words, why are you telling us to be peaceful at home when you draft us to be violent abroad? All right. If it's okay for you to draft us and be violent in defense of you abroad, it's okay for us to be violent in defense of ourselves at home. All right. He's kind of saying you can't have it both ways. All right. And it's that last paragraph on page of the second excerpt. All right. If violence is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong to be violent defending black women and black children and black babies and black men, if that's wrong, if it's wrong in Malcolm's mind, for them to defend themselves, then it's also wrong for America to draft them and make them violent abroad in defense of the United States. And then he flips it. If it's right for you to do that, if it's right for the U.S. government to draft African Americans to be violent abroad in defense of her, then it is right, in Malcolm's mind, for him and for other African Americans to do whatever it takes to defend themselves right here in this country. All right, so that's excerpt 2. Let's get to excerpt 3. All right, let's start the video again.
To show you, you don't have a peaceful revolution.
Second line.
You don't have a turn the other cheek revolution. There's no such thing as a nonviolent revolution. Only kind of revolution that's nonviolent is the Negro revolution. The only revolution based on loving your enemy is the Negro revolution. The only revolution in which the goal is a desegregated lunch counter, a desegregated theater,
This is good.
a desegregated park, and a desegregated public toilets. You can sit down next to white folks on the toilet. That's no revolution. Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. The white man knows what a revolution is. He knows that the black revolution is worldwide, in scope and in nature. The black revolution is sweeping Asia, sweeping Africa. It's rearing its head in Latin America.
This post World War II era, the 50s and the 60s. What Malcolm is referring to is former colonies of European countries gaining their independence throughout these decades, both in Latin America, in Asia, and in Africa.
The Cuban Revolution, that's a revolution. They overturned the system. Revolution is in Asia. Revolution is in Africa. And the white man is screaming because he sees revolution in Latin America. How do you think he'll react to you when you learn what a real revolution is? You don't know what a revolution is. If you did, you wouldn't use that word. A revolution is bloody. Revolution is hostile. Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. And you sitting around here like a knot on the wall saying, I'm going to love these folks no matter how much they hate me. No, you need a revolution. Who ever heard of a revolution where they lock arms, as Reverend Cleage was pointing out beautifully, singing, we shall overcome? Just tell me you don't do that in a revolution.
Here's a famous line.
You don't do any singing, you're too busy swinging. It's based on land. A revolutionary wants land so he can set up his own nation, an independent nation. These Negroes aren't asking for no nation. They're trying to crawl back on the plantation.
What about Dr. King here?
When you want a nation, that's called nationalism. When the white man became involved in a revolution in this country against England, what was it for? He wanted this land so he could set up another white nation. That's white nationalism. The American Revolution was white nationalism. The French Revolution was white nationalism. The Russian Revolution, too, yes, it was white nationalism. You don't think so? Why you think Khrushchev and Mao can't get their heads together? White nationalism. All the revolutions that's going on in Asia and Africa today are based on what? Black nationalism.
All right, so let's get to questions. All right, so the first question, excerpt 3. How does Malcolm X feel about King's methods? All right, well, as you can guess, he's mocking them. All right, if you look at the first paragraph, the only kind of revolution that's nonviolent is the Negro Revolution. The only revolution based on loving your enemy is the Negro Revolution. The only revolution in which the goal is a desegregated lunch counter, a desegregated theater, a desegregated park, and a desegregated public toilet. You can sit down next to white folks on the toilet. That's no revolution. All right, so it brings humor into it, too. Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. So he's mocking it. He doesn't think it's enough. He doesn't think it's a real revolution, aggressive enough. Okay? Let's get to the next question. All right. How does Malcolm X justify violence as a means for Black Americans to improve themselves? All right. So again, he's pointing to history, and in this case, what he calls white history, right? That all throughout white history, they've had these bloody revolutions. All right, the American Revolution. But he also talks about more recently the Cuban Revolution, the Asian Revolution. Mao Zedong taking power in communist China. Okay, if you look at the next paragraph, a revolution is bloody. A revolution is hostile. It knows no compromise. It overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. Okay. But then he again points to the Dr. King and other nonviolent civil rights activists as, singing "We Shall Overcome," locking arms, things like that. And he goes on to say, you don't do any singing, you're too busy swinging. Very famous line. Basically saying you don't do that in revolution. You don't love your enemy in a revolution. You don't lock arms like that in a revolution. Okay, it needs to be violent, as every revolution, according to Malcolm, has been in the past. Okay, and all these revolutions in the past, in Malcolm's view, was nationalism, right? The American Revolution, to be a patriot, was to want your own nation, to be a nationalist. All right, and he lists all these different revolutions: Russian, French, American. They were all white national revolutions. He's saying now it's time for a Black national revolution, Black nationalism. All right. So that's how he's further justifying violence or retaliatory violence. All right. All right. So let's get to excerpt 4. All right. Where Malcolm evokes the archetypal house Negro. Here we go.
To understand this, you have to go back to what young brother here referred to as the house Negro and the field Negro, back during slavery. There was two kinds of slaves. There was the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro, they lived in the house with master. They dressed pretty good. They ate good because they ate his food before he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but still they lived near their master. And they loved their master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save their master's house quicker than the master would. The house Negro, if the master said, we got a good house here, the house Negro said, yeah, we got a good house here. Whenever the master said we, he said we. That's how you can tell a house Negro. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, what's the matter, boss? We sick. We sick. He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, let's run away, let's escape, let's separate, that house Negro would look at you and say, man, you crazy. What you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this? Where can I wear better clothes than this? Where can I eat better food than this? That was that house Negro. In those days, he was called a house nigger. And that's what we call him today because we still got some house niggers running around here.
All right, so let's get to the next question. All right, I think it's only explaining what he means by house Negro. Right. So basically, he's referring to house slaves. And again, more recently, we've changed our historical memory of what it meant to be a house slave. You know, kind of this psychological difficulty. All right, but that's what's wrong with this highlighted paragraph here. So basically, the house slave was the person that was the slave that lived inside the house, and in all reality, the slave identifying with the master was out of self-preservation, but it still meant identifying with the owner. His interests became your interests. What benefited him, in turn, you thought benefited you. All right, and there was a resentment sometimes between the field slaves and the house slaves, because the house slaves tended to dress a little bit nicer, eat a little bit nicer, so on and so forth. All right, so they were viewed as somewhat of a traitor to the other slaves on the plantation, having kind of this lapdog quality of please accept me as one of your own type of thing. And that's what Malcolm is implying is true about nonviolent civil rights activists, that they have this kind of lapdog quality, wanting to get a, quote, seat at the table. All right. What Malcolm is arguing for is a different table. Okay. All right, guys, last question, last excerpt. All right. And again, this is kind of, he goes more into depth on the whole house Negro image here. All right, according to Malcolm X, what are Uncle Toms and how do they slow progress for blacks in America? All right, only about a minute and a half.
Just as the slave master in that day used Tom, the house Negro, to keep the field Negroes in check, the same old slave master today has Negroes who are nothing but modern Uncle Toms, 20th century Uncle Toms, to keep you and me in check, keep us under control, keep us passive and peaceful in nonviolence. That's Tom making you nonviolent. It's like when you go to the dentist and the man is going to take your tooth. You're going to fight him when he starts pulling. So there's squirt some stuff in your jaw called Novocaine to make you think they're not doing anything to you. So you sit there and because you got all that Novocaine in your jaw, you suffer peacefully. Blood running all down your jaw. And you don't know what's happening. Because someone has taught you to suffer peacefully. The white man do the same thing to you in the street. When he don't want to put knots on your head and take advantage of you and don't have to be afraid of you fighting back. To keep you from fighting back, you get these old religious Uncle Toms to teach you and me that just like Novocaine, suffer peacefully.
All right, so last question. What are Uncle Toms and how do they slow progress for blacks in America, according to Malcolm? So Uncle Toms are, synonymous with the house Negroes. All right. So just like the slave owner would use house Negroes as a liaison between him, the owner, and the field slaves to try and calm them down. He would ask the house slave, go talk with them, explain this to them, that kind of thing. All right. Malcolm is comparing that to modern day civil rights activists, all right, who are doing nothing but getting you to suffer peacefully. All right, so that white folk won't have to, they can keep doing what they're doing, not have to worry about you fighting back. Okay, much the same way would happen on the plantation during slavery. All right, so that suffering peacefully is a very good phrase that may or maybe should find its way into your final paper. All right, and there is some truth to this. I mean, once Dr. King was assassinated, there were a lot of public intellectual African Americans arguing that, okay, Dr. King, he was the person keeping Black rage in check, keeping it from exploding. It's a powder keg waiting to explode. Now that you've killed him, what have you done? All right, you've caused that powder keg to explode. All right, so there is some truth to that. I'm not saying the way Malcolm framed it is totally correct. I'm just saying that Dr. King did have a pacifying effect on African Americans, for better or worse. Okay? All right, so that is Message to the Grassroots.